Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Vent Vent, the program for and by the gay and lesbian community. I'm your host for this evening, Vivian Ward, and welcome. This is our second series, and in our first series we looked at queer relationships and where we stood in relation to the Equal Opportunities Commission. This particular episode raised many questions pertaining to our rights as gays and lesbians. So tonight we take the opportunity to discuss these rights in further details and look at what the heterosexual community has in relation to what we don't have. Now tonight joining us we have Janet Jukes. Janet is the head of the Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby. We also have Jamie Gardner, and Jamie's been a gay activist for many years, I'm told, and been involved in gay rights for many years and lobbied Parliament. We also have Eakin Curry, and he's an openly gay candidate. He was a candidate in for a Liberal seat in Albert Park in 1996.
It was in Albert Park up against John Thwaites, so it was a Labor seat.
Sorry, but you're a Liberal candidate.
I was a Liberal candidate.
Yes. We have Charmaine Clark, who is the #1 Senate candidate for the Australian Greens in Victoria. That's right. And we have Julie Peters, who's a gender activist and Victorian campaign manager for the Australian Democrats in Victoria. Welcome to our esteemed panel this evening. Now, I'd like to pose the first question to you, please, Jamie. What is, in the workplace, what is some of the unspoken discrimination that's faced?
Well, Vivian, I suppose that discrimination occurs in a whole range of ways, and ultimately is a question of people not being treated the same. And the situation of people who are known to be lesbian or known to be gay or known to be transgender, anything out of the ordinary that is, can experience a variety of discrimination either from their superiors or just in the way people treat them at work. And those things are, well, I suppose it's much easier to deal with them when they are spoken. And I think we're in a position now, given that we have an Equal Opportunity Act which outlaws discrimination at work on the ground of sexual orientation, that the overt discrimination that used to exist is much less common, because at least there is a remedy. But of course the real problem with any remedy like the Equal Opportunity Act is that you've actually got to use it before it works. And using it, perhaps the biggest unspoken discrimination is just that in order to take a complaint of discrimination, you have to take action as a gay person or as a person suspected of being gay because there is an out. And perhaps the biggest unspoken discrimination is that to have equal treatment, you're sort of forced to be in some sense out when you may not be ready to. The fact that it matters whether or not you're out is in fact a reflection of the more global problem of discrimination in our society and proof that we've got a long way to go.
Now, Janet, you and I spoke at length about some other issues in the workplace, especially for those who feel that they can't come out about the way that it affects your lifestyle as a whole. If in the workplace you have to actually keep quiet. Can you extend on that a little for me?
Sure. I mean, one of the types of discrimination which surveys such as the GLAD survey a number of years ago in Victoria, but also the survey that Sydney Uni is doing now, the Australian Council for Lesbian and Gay Research are doing now in workplace discrimination, is finding that a lot of people either don't come out or can't talk about their private life at all, and that's discrimination. If you can't talk about what's happening in your life and you can't be a full and whole person in your workplace, then you're being discriminated against because it's not safe. People don't feel safe to be able to do that. So that's one sort of discrimination. Another one is there was some research in the United States a number of years ago looking at people's ability to get jobs if they were out, and what this research did was they sent out CVs which were identical in every other way except they identified somebody, that person as gay or lesbian by a membership of a community organisation or a choir or a sporting group, and they found that the overwhelming majority of CVs that got accepted you were 70 or 80% more likely to get an interview if you weren't out through your CV. Now that sort of discrimination can't be picked up. I mean, you don't even know it's happened to you. You get just a no-way response. So that sort of discrimination it's very difficult to take it to the anti-discrimination, through the anti-discrimination legislation, the Equal Opportunity Commission, and get some remedy for it. But that's the sort of discrimination which we all face.
Now, legally there is still some discrimination that some of us within our community are legally able to be faced in the workforce, and that's the transsexual community. Joy, why is it that transsexuals don't have any protection in the workplace?
Well, I think probably the main reason is that we've been slower to start a big lobbying campaign, and we're also a very, very small group. There's probably about 1,000, maybe 2,000 in Australia, and so to actually get enough from that, we're 100 times smaller than the gay and lesbian community. So to actually, to get that political force happening, it's going to just take longer, and it actually really requires, in many ways, parties and people to actually choose to feel that it's important that these people are not discriminated against. And so, if any party were to lose a transgender vote, I don't think anybody would actually care. So, so we certainly don't have that lobbying ability. But the discrimination is certainly very real, and unlike gays and lesbians, when you actually change gender at work, for example, people you can decide you're gay or decide you're lesbian on a particular day and don't have to tell anybody for 50 years. But if you decide to change gender at work, well, people notice that.
It's not exactly subtle, no,
it's not subtle, no.
Which is a good thing. Now, Janet, we also talked about superannuation last week, and you were saying that being gay or lesbian means that you work 7% less than the heterosexual community. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. Well, all of our employers contribute, we're at the moment 6%, but next financial year will be 7% of our income to compulsorily contribute that to a superannuation fund. But gay men and lesbians in relationships don't enjoy the full benefits of that superannuation. So effectively, we're all working for less.
Now, another issue that's certainly been in our media of late is the discrimination within the church. Now, we saw the rainbow sash wearers only a few weeks ago lobbying at St Peter's with 75 others hoping to receive Holy Communion. Now, perhaps you could put your view across about what you think of the church and their discrimination.
Oh, gosh.
That's a hard one.
You're asking the liberal about the church.
I think it's crazy. Yeah.
I guess without sort of wanting to necessarily get into an attack on individuals in the church, I think it's one of those kind of things where to question somebody's belief, or to suggest that this is what we believe and these are the kind of elements of that which we want to try and encourage in people who follow our belief, is something that's equally important to, say, the Catholic Church as it would be to us, to be able to sort of say, okay, well, this is something that's as important to us. The debate about whether or not gays and lesbians who are active members of the Catholic Church should be given communion is really probably a debate more that they need to be having than anything necessarily that politicians or legislators should be doing anything about. We can offer the fullest support, and as a gay man, of course, obviously I'm going to say, well, without necessarily being a Catholic, I think it would be great to be able to see the Catholic Church perhaps reviewing some of the things which have been part of its history, and saying, well, okay, if part of what we're about is tolerance and acceptance, then maybe it's time to revisit those sorts of issues.
Yeah, Jamie, maybe you could just clear something up with me in relation to the church. The church is exempt from discrimination, isn't it?
Well, putting it that way, no, the church is very commonly discriminating, but the church is not exempt from racial discrimination laws. There have been and are religions, not just churches, which have systematically discriminated on the basis of race, and that's not allowed in Australia, anywhere in Australia. So the church is not allowed to discriminate on the ground of race, and frankly I can't see the slightest reason why the church should be allowed to discriminate on the ground of sexual orientation. And membership of a church is voluntary, that's true. One of the issues, in fact, that I suspect we ought to look at is not so much the discrimination against, as outside the church, not so much the discrimination against those who are within a body and want to change it, although that's a very important issue, but the discrimination practiced by churches like the Catholic Church in particular against those who don't in fact have sufficient freedom to make up their own minds and to choose not to be part of it. Now, thinking about the problems of school children, lesbian girls, gay boys in Catholic schools are subjected to a long-term barrage of soul-destroying discrimination, of self-esteem damaging vilification, and there is no protection for them at all. And I think that's a disgrace and something which we ought to do something about.
Because there's also, and I think Janet, you and I were discussing this last week, that in schools, if you're a gay teacher, you can actually be sacked, is that correct?
Certainly, the anti-discrimination legislation has an exemption which says that the anti-discrimination legislation, or the Equal Opportunity Act, says that you can't discriminate against people on the basis of lawful sexual activity, but then it has a whole lot of exemptions, and it says except under all of these circumstances, and one of those exemptions is if you work with children. So that exemption has had the effect, I believe, to cause a lot of gay and lesbian teachers not to come out to their children, and to create an environment where people who are working with children aren't going to talk about sexuality or talk about sex with children. And obviously that's very problematic, because we all are discovering our sexuality when we're teenagers. I mean, we're discovering sex for the first time, and it should be a wonderful time, and it should be a wonderful time for gay men and lesbians, and also for kids with gender issues as well. I mean, it's a time of discovering yourself, and it's a time when we're not allowed, when you're exposed, really the outside world is the school, and you're not allowed to talk about these things with the school. And so I think that creates a whole lot of long-term issues around self-esteem, and issues around, people, alcohol and drug abuse, and a whole lot of other social issues.
All right, well, we're off to break now, but we'll be back talking to our politicians after the break about where they stand in relation to the discrimination. Good evening and welcome back to this week's episode of Bent Vent. We are discussing gay politics this evening. Now, before the break, we're looking at different areas of discrimination faced by the gay, lesbian, transgender and bisexual community. Now, I'd like to throw the first question over to Charmaine, who is our Democrats candidate. Green. I'm brown, but I'm green, actually. She's brown, but she's definitely green. But listen, the first question that I'd like to pass to you, Charmaine, is do you actually use your position, being a Green politician, to get on your own soapbox and talk about what you want to talk about?
Why not?
And is that helpful to the gay and lesbian community?
People look at me and they obviously see an Indigenous person, and everyone assumes that that's the only things that I'm interested in. I'm also a lesbian, but people don't see that until I actually tell them that. And that's something that is either a personal choice, generally it's a personal choice, or you could utilise it as a political leverage as well. I am very much an open lesbian. I've been doing campaigning recently in lead up to a possible federal election soon, and there's been an absolute absence of anyone asking me about my sexuality. So I basically have to sort of bring it forth myself.
Does that mean you're overshadowing the other areas, though, that you should be concerned about? Considering you're a Green politician, shouldn't you be more concerned about Green issues rather than gay and lesbian issues?
But see, the reason why I'm running too is also to demystify the Greens. People assume we're just a one-issue party, which we're not just a one-issue party. We're not just about the environment. We do have policies on gay and lesbian issues. We have policy on Indigenous issues, women's issues, and the environment, of course. So I've also been talking a lot on Indigenous issues, being the obvious... That's the obvious questions that most commentators actually ask me. But I'm looking forward to being able to actually get also a platform in which to talk about gay and lesbian issues as well.
Vivian, it's an interesting point you make when you sort of say, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Julie, and you'll experience it soon, in the federal election, but I found when I was a candidate, people were sort of coming up to me, and particularly people in the gay community, and saying, well, you're a gay man, regardless of whether you're with the Liberal Party or some other party, you should therefore be advocating a gay vote. And I say, well, yeah, that's true to a degree, but I mean, at what point do you start being gay and stop being liberal? The two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, nor are they, nor does one weigh more heavily than the other. And I would often say, well, okay, yes, I happen to be a gay man, and that's a symbol of something that's important, and it's a symbol of who I am, but I'm a liberal first and foremost, otherwise I'd be running for a gay party, not a liberal party. So I think in that sense it's important to, and like I said, I mean, you'll find these things out, but there is more to, I guess in that sense, politics than just a sexual choice element to it. It's an important part of it because we're the same members of the community as everybody else. But there are so many more broader issues, and it depends on how much influence you want to have. Do you want to marginalise yourself by necessarily playing on one segment of an issue that's important, and then potentially, alienating a huge part of the vote, or do you want to try and spread as much good as you possibly can across a whole range of issues?
Well, you certainly sound like a politician.
I try.
It's certainly true for me that it's far more important than just one issue lobbying. That's why I joined a major party, because to me, I mean, gay, lesbians, transgendered all breathe polluted air. Environmental issues are important. The unemployment is particularly high in gay, lesbian, transgender communities. It's very, very high. In fact,
but we had before the break that, I mean, there are so many issues of discrimination. I mean, we only touched the tip of the iceberg, didn't we, guys? I mean, there are so many issues of discrimination still forced upon our community. Don't you owe it, being part of the queer community, to really get out there and really use your positions of power for this?
I've stood as a lesbian transsexual Democrat, and of course that got a little bit of interest from particularly tabloid media, and I did use that. I used that for them to come to see me, and then I talked about my transgenderism, and when Kerry Ann asked me, wasn't my life sad as a child, I said no. It was about breaking down stereotypes about being transgendered, and the fact that somebody who's transgender can stand for Parliament actually in itself is about breaking down stereotypes. And the same with gay, lesbian as well. I mean, the fact that we're not seen in a normal gay, lesbian sort of stereotypical environment means that it has to actually start to break down stereotypes. In many ways, that breaking down of stereotypes is sort of the social path, that is not the legislative path to actually changing the way people think.
I think it's really important also to have out gay and lesbian candidates in every single party, because even if they're in a party that isn't necessarily the best friend of the gay, lesbian and transgender community, they're in the party room and they're part of the party, and they're breaking down the sorts of barriers that Julie's talking about, the prejudice and the mystique of the whole idea that all gay men, lesbians, transgender, bisexual people have a disco ball in their lounge room, or it's actually sort of trying to, it shows that we are full human beings who are part of the whole of society. So whether the important thing is being out. That's the most important thing.
And I think it also, it says volumes about perhaps some of the perceptions about the gay and lesbian community if we think that the only way that we can get a message across about credibility for gays and lesbians, and perhaps even learning a bit of acceptance where there isn't some in so many of the things we do, it downgrades, I guess, the argument a bit to say that the only way we're going to achieve those sorts of things is through just gay activism. If we can't demonstrate, that we are capable of so much more, and we know we are, then what chance have we ever got being able to be accepted into what we already call mainstream society?
Now, what are your personal opinions from a political point of view need to be changed to help the discrimination? Any one of you?
That's huge. That's huge.
Oh, well, it's huge. Such a huge question. We think, where do we start? But I mean, legislative change does help. It certainly does help because for a start, it raises the issues in a way that they have to be discussed publicly, and particularly when you look at that in Tasmania. The actual discussion shifted public opinion a long way because people who live out in the suburbs, as far as they know, have never met a gay person. All of a sudden, they're thinking about these issues, and that actually they have to make a decision because all of a sudden they've been confronted with discussion on this issue. So I think the whole legislative process is a very positive one, and that's why, to an extent, the Democrats are delaying our bill through federal parliament so that the discussion goes on and on and on. And we've already seen a big shift in a number of, particularly of parliamentarians who have been on those committees. We've actually seen individuals actually shift from being a bit homophobic to being thinking the legislation should actually be passed. So that sort of thing is really positive, and as that discussion happens in the general community as well, that sort of process can happen as well, because you get most opinions about gay, lesbian, transgender, it's very much based on stereotypes of who they think those people are. When they actually get to meet a real transsexual, or a real gay man, they go, they're not what I thought.
Isn't it the most common comment is, well, I never would have picked you as gay.
What is it?
Don't say that to me.
I know they say that to me all the time. We all know that different acts of parliament contradict each other, and Janet and I certainly discussed this on previous show that we've done together. But for the gay and lesbian community, do these contradictions, especially legislative contradictions I'm more talking about here, do they work for or against us, do you think? Janet, what do you think on that one?
I'm not entirely sure what you mean about the contradictions.
I'll have to go, because I think all conflict gives you the opportunity to get a lever in. It's like a little crevice in a rock.
Yeah.
And when you're in a position to be able to say, well, this part of the law is inconsistent with that part of the law, there needs to be a process of resolving the contradiction. Now, for example, we have an Equal Opportunity Act in the state which says that discrimination in various areas of life on the ground of sexual orientation is unlawful. And then we have a whole lot of other laws which the Equal Opportunity Commission has just identified in its recent report, which permit or require discrimination on the ground of sexual orientation, although that's not what they started out to do. So we're in the position with the same-sex relationships report where we can see, and the politicians can see, and if enough of those who are watching this program can tell the politicians, and their friends tell politicians, that these inconsistencies are impossible and must be stopped, then we'll get the situation where where there is pressure to bring the law, one hopes, into consistency with the better part of it. Of course, there's always the possibility of going the other way, but I think that when you've got two options, and not necessarily statute law, you can also have other parts of the law, where you're in the ability to say, well, that interpretation is inconsistent with that. This one is consistent with human rights and a fair deal and the Australian way, and so that one should be changed. And there's a bit of also, and you use laws in other states at the same time for the same purpose. So I thought we don't want to be as far behind as that lot.
I think that's something that Julie sort of touched on a bit too earlier, and that was sort of saying, the Democrats are holding up the bill in the Senate. And that's about as much as recognising that, politics is the art of the possible. These things are gently, slowly. There are so many people in Australia with so many different views, and it does take time to get the kind of institutional change that we're talking about.
Or you could also, try to the other extreme, to an extreme as well. I mean, Senator Bob Brown, who's the leader of the Australian Greens, some time ago proposed actually having a ministry for gay and lesbian transgender people, for issues, like you have Ministry for Aboriginal Affairs, you have Ministry for Migration, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it was thrown out, but I mean, the fact that you threw it in there for people to debate.
Something that maybe one day we'd like to see. Now, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our program for another night, but remember, an election's probably not that far away, and your vote certainly does count, and it certainly is of importance, wouldn't we all agree? And it's the only way. We're all going, me, maybe one day it'll be me. I mean, it's the only way to see change is to really look at what's on offer. So I'd like to thank our panel tonight. We've had a very interesting discussion, and until next week, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.